I fully join my very good friend Adetumbi to support that this policy be domesticated. In fact, Mr. President, my colleagues, a lot of Nigerians were really worried. The reason for the worry was because of the spate of insecurity in Nigeria. And for us having known that part of the insecurity came from elements coming outside and into Nigeria, to now have a visa policy that doesn't seem to be properly regulated was giving a lot of people a lot of jitters, because what it now meant was that anybody could just come in and actually cause mayhem in Nigeria, not knowing this. So we really want to support distinguished Senator Adetumbi in this particular motion, that we domesticate it so that the do's and don'ts and cross the I's and dot the I's and cross the T's in how you can come into Nigeria. I know that Nigeria is the big brother of Africa, but sometimes if you try to be big brother when you don't have anything left, you may just find yourself with nothing. And we want to make sure that we take care of our citizens before we start taking care of the whole of Africa. And so I fully support this motion.
Mr. President, Gabriel Suswam, Benue Northeast. Mr. President, I was going to observe, but you say there is no observation in our rules. You allow him to continue because he was trying to adumbrate the motion, which our rules does not allow. So I was going to raise that what I was doing was not necessarily correct, but that is gone. Mr. President, let me join the mover of this motion and say that, for me, Mr. President made a policy statement within the context of African head of state. I don't think that that was intended to say that this policy was going to be implemented without the necessary amendment, because if we look at the Immigration Act, it is stated clearly the method of coming into this country. You must have visa before you come. We don't have a policy that allow us or allow other internationals to come into this country, get visa on arrival. So we must necessarily, as National Assembly, saddle with that responsibility, legislate on that before it is implemented. Otherwise, so I don't think it is any problem. He made a policy statement. It is now incumbent on him, as Mr. President, to also direct the necessary authorities. Let them bring the Immigration Act here for us to amend. When we amend it, we will now be able to input properly what we need to do and how that policy will be carried out. So, for me, it's a policy meeting within the African head of state, and he feels that let us relax a little bit. It must and have to be legislated. And so I think his motion is in order, and that Mr. President should be urged to quickly send in the amendment to the Immigration Act so that we'll properly take the necessary action on it.
When international agreements are entered into by Nigeria, they should be properly domesticated to give it the bite of legality and legitimacy. Mr. President, I think the visa aspect of this agreement needs to be looked into very closely and critically. Mr. President, we are aware that in recent years, a part of Nigeria, Embakasi, was ceded to Cameroon, and up to this moment, as required by law, no act of the National Assembly has been enacted to give it some level of legality. And today our people out there are in a quandary as to where they belong. So, Mr. President, I support this need for domestication. But, Mr. President, I want to raise this very critical point before we begin to debate on what may not be at issue. There are two clear things here. There is visa on arrival, and Mr. President, there is free visa. What Mr. President said recently that I know is free visa for Africans to enter Nigeria. Mr. President, visa on arrival is a policy that has been in place by the Nigerian Immigration Service since 2012. And that means that if for whatever reason you are unable to get visa from your country of origin, you can fill the necessary forms and get to the airport or port of entry and get your visa. And so clearly, Mr. President, what we are debating here is free entry visa for Africans, as announced by Mr. President. And again, I think as part of the African Free Trade Arrangement, it needs an act of the National Assembly to back it up. I think we should take steps to do that. Thank you, Mr.
Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, my name is Betty Apiafi. I represent Rivers West Senatorial District. Mr. President, I'd like to take us back to when this African Free Trade Zone Treaty was to be signed and the reluctance of Nigeria not to sign this treaty. There are obviously a lot of reasons why we didn't sign this treaty. And when eventually the treaty was signed, this Senate debated extensively on this treaty and the need for the executive to immediately send the treaty to the Senate for domestication, or for us to even understand the document or the content of the treaty. The African Free Trade Zone Treaty is a treaty that will alter a lot of things in terms of the way we do business and Nigeria as a nation. And it is not a document I think we should take in piecemeals. And of course, again, in these days when we have situations where the government can take an executive order and just pass an executive order and things are done as per the executive order being as good as a law, it is dangerous for us to allow this process to continue. And I'd like to join my colleagues to commend the mover of this motion and to insist that the treaty, the entire document of the treaty, be brought to the National Assembly for us to understand these documents and seek expertise advice on how to domesticate and what we need to take out as portions of this treaty that may not be suitable for Nigeria. Thank you, Mr. President.
Is there anybody against the motion? To invite the Controller General of the Nigerian Immigration Service to appear before Senate Committee on Interior, Judiciary and Legal Matters to inform the Senate on the technical, logistics, legal and constitutional issues that are available and required for compliance before implementation of the said visa on arrival policy. Those in favor of this prayer say aye. Amendment, Minority Leader.
Yeah.
Those in favor of prayer 1 as amended say aye. Those against say nay. The ayes have it. Prayer 2. To invite the Attorney General of the Federation and the Honourable Minister of Justice to submit a copy of an executive bill on the said agreement and other subsidiary legislation that are to be published in the Federal Gazette within 2 weeks. Those in favor of prayer 2 say aye. Those against say nay. Senator Adetumbi, please can you withdraw this prayer? Thank you very much for the various interventions. I didn't want any of your prayers killed. I also agree with the position of Senator Betty Apiafi. There are other treaties and agreements that we have signed as a country. I think the Attorney General of the Federation should be able to forward those to the National Assembly for us to ratify them appropriately and give them the legal backing that they require.